How has the COVID pandemic helped me look more thoughtfully at our economic systems? I'd like to just say a word about this series. Many of you have been on the series before. Maybe some of you are on for a first time. But we started this when COVID just began because we sensed very early on that it is the time of the great revealer. By having COVID among us, we have learned a lot, and it's opened us to new ways of seeing things, new ways perhaps of living into creation. So together, let us examine what it means to live into God's creative power and to explore this theme. What does it mean to be a Quaker today, living into faith in a changing world? What is the unique gift of Quakers? We seek a new revival of our calling as friends. We seek the collective transformation of the living Christ, that God's love might be visible in this beautiful world. So let us be awake to this moment. The theme for today is, do we serve the economy or does the economy serve us? And we're very, very grateful to have with us Joachim Montalban and Jonathan Woolley, both from QUNO Geneva. It's very precious to have them both at the same time. And so we've come to the time when we get to hear an introduction from Jonathan Woolley, who's director at QUNO Geneva. And he will tell us a bit about the Sustainable and Just Economic System program, which is relatively new, which Joachim is representative for. So we'll be hearing from him. But first, Jonathan will help us understand how this came about, and he will introduce Joachim to us. Jonathan.
Thank you, Gretchen. Thank you, friends. Great pleasure to be with you. I speak with a little trepidation because it's lovely to see among you all several people who have been involved in the governance of QUNO Geneva. So I have to be very careful what I say. How lovely to see you, friends. How lovely to see everybody. Thank you for your interest. For those of you who've been coming to many sessions of the series, in the second session, you already heard from the other part of QUNO, from Andrew Tomlinson, who leads the New York office. My purpose today isn't to tell you all about QUNO Geneva, much as I would like to, but to try and frame the main part of what you will hear, which indeed, as Gretchen has said, will be by Joachim Montalban, who's been working with us since early 2019 and is the representative for sustainable and just economic systems. We're a group of 10 people in QUNO Geneva. We have 4 different programs, each with a program representative. And there are also 3 one-year program assistants working with us at any one time, as well as our program administrative staff. The reason this program is being tested in its present state, and it's a pilot program which we hope to continue, is that in many ways over the years, we've been working in bits of the economic question. We worked a lot on intellectual property rights. We worked on food and sustainability. But it became more and more obvious that the connection with each of our other programs demanded a deeper look at the economic systems that frame everything else that happens. You've heard perhaps about our work on climate change. Why things are as they are in climate change has a lot to do with what our economic systems are. We work on human rights, particularly at the moment, a big effort on the human rights of migrants. I think I need hardly draw the connection there with why the migration exists. And we work on peace and disarmament. Again, why are the arms all over the world? Why is it so difficult to move peace forward? The connections, I hope, are very clear. As you listen to Joachim, I'd just like to mention a couple of other things. Our programs are long-term, but we also benefit from being a small team and being flexible and agile. In other words, trying to perceive, to discern what is best in terms of our work with the staff of the United Nations, with diplomats, with other NGOs in our quiet diplomacy. We could say that we're really trying to keep ourselves open to the ways that open up, something I think that comes very much from our Quaker background. And in our quiet diplomacy, which you'll hear more about, there's a lot of listening. And it seems very trite, but sometimes I find myself saying, one of the major things we bring as a Quaker organization is to listen to people and encourage others to listen to each other. So let me say just very briefly something about Joachim. As I say, he's been with us since 2019, but he came to QUNO with some 15 years of very relevant experience in different aspects of economic systems. He has degrees in government, in law, in economics, and in the governance of sustainability. He's been in Geneva some 12 years. He's worked both with government and also with think tanks and with UN agencies. So we're very lucky to have him working with us. I mentioned already that this program is a pilot. We're very much hoping to establish it long term. QUNO is generously supported by Britain Yearly Meeting and many others, including many here present, but we always have a challenge to have enough finance to keep going. So may I leave in your minds as well to hold us in the light as we seek sources for further funding to make this work possible. And with that, may I pass to Joachim to take us further.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are around the world. It's really a pleasure to be here with you and to talk with you about sustainable and just economic systems. So first of all, to paint kind of a picture of sustainable and just economic systems, we see that we face a number of existential threats around the world, but also opportunities to overcome those threats and to move to more mature, more equitable, more sustainable, and also caring societies. We can see, first of all, the environmental and climate crisis. And we are indeed actually following exactly the disastrous trajectories that the Club of Rome's Limits to Growth study set out already in the early 1970s. So if we look at those graphs that the Limits to Growth study set out, we are actually exactly following those trajectories. This is also related to inequality, because actually it is the affluent citizens of the world that are responsible for most environmental impacts. Actually, the wealthiest 20% of people around the world are responsible for about the use of 80% of the resources. And related to this is that neoliberalism and also capitalism, they have put the onus on individual responsibility and not on social cohesion. And most economic gains actually over the past few decades, they have gone to a fairly small elite. What we need to do I think, to address those challenges is we need to reappreciate, for example, the public sector. So as every crisis in the past and also the current COVID pandemic shows, is that the state is critical in building the resilience of societies and backing up the most vulnerable citizens. Then there's also the time context. So we can see that assumptions and criticism. Then there's also the time context. So we can see that assumptions and criticism on the way that our economic systems work are currently really in flux. So the dissatisfaction with our economic systems is really palpable. And just in the breakout group, we also discussed briefly on how the pandemic shows that inequality around the world is really growing. So really a lot of people are looking for ideas on how our economic systems can become more sustainable and more equitable. If we look at the bigger picture and we look at history, then we have seen that there have always been waves and comings and goings of economic systems. And we can see that economic systems, they rise and they stagnate and they decline again. And we think that we have currently arrived at the end of an economic cycle, especially in the West. And we can see that the benefits of capitalism, for example, for the wider population, they're being questioned. Some economists even think that we have arrived at the brink of a new golden age that is driven by sustainability and by technology. So, for example, with environmental technologies, we can both stimulate our economy and we also can safeguard our environment. I think that there could be some rationale in that reasoning, that we are at the end of an economic cycle and that we are ahead of a new golden age. But what we should also add into that is the importance of social cohesion. So we see that different factors are at play in our economic systems. We have globalization and growing connectivity, for example, through the internet. Otherwise, we couldn't all be here from around the world in one meeting. We can see the growing importance of technology and innovation. But at the same time, we need to be aware of the importance of local action, of local community, and of social cohesion. And also look at some behavioral factors, for example, looking at consumerism and things like the amount of meat that we consume. So the questions that all of this provokes are, first of all, what or who is the economy for? What is really the purpose of our economy, right? And also, what is the role of humans in the economy? Are we just factors of production, for example? Are we just human resources in the economy? And that brings up the question, for example, of why do we work more and more when we have become so much more productive than 50 years ago, for example? So in other words, why is society serving the economy and why is it not the other way around? This was a question that was already asked by the famous economist Polanyi in 1944. So here enters the QUNO's Sustainable Just and Economic Systems program that I'm running. This program has a number of foundations. First of all, we see that humans can have autonomy and actually stewardship over the economy. And the economy should serve people and the planet. So the growth of gross domestic product of GDP should be a means to an end. For example, it should be targeted at poverty reduction. Then what we also have as a center is the Quaker testimony of stewardship, which also means that we can be in control of the economy and guide it in directions that we think are necessary and desirable for human and environmental flourishing. And very importantly, we need spiritual solutions to our economic problems, because spirituality makes us aware of our autonomy, and at the same time, it makes us aware of respect for others and for the world around us. Spirituality also allows discernment, and spirituality means detachment from the material world. So what we need is radical approaches in the sense of addressing really the root causes of global challenges, such as inequality, such as climate change and pollution. So we need a totally different kind of economy, an economy that is low carbon, that is circular in the sense that we keep on using and reusing the same resources, so that we don't need to dig up resources from the ground, make products, and then we throw those products into landfill, but we keep on recycling more of our products. And the economy should also be regenerative, for example, in restoring forests and restoring the oceans. It should be a peaceful economy, and it should be in respect of human rights, and it should be equitable. And radical here, it also means that any transition towards sustainability can only be effective if far-reaching lifestyle changes complement systemic change. So when I say systemic change, that includes political change. In terms of the methods that we use in the SJES program, is that we have an innovative and unique deliberative approach, which is called quiet diplomacy. So what we really try to offer to diplomats is a quiet and safe space in which all diplomats can be heard and can be listened to. We are also even-handed, and we listen to all stakeholders, which includes diplomats, but also other NGOs and government stakeholders. So what do we do in terms of concrete action? First of all, we follow really a cycle of action and reflection. And as Jonathan just mentioned, we are currently in the pilot and scoping phase of the SJES program. What we are seeking in the first line of work is really transformation of economic models and paradigms. So this year we will be publishing a notes series on the topics of inequality, on the purpose of the economy, on questioning growth and GDP, and also suggesting alternative and complementary indicators for progress. We will also be looking at just transition to low carbon economy, because a low carbon economy is very desirable, but we also need to be caring of those that will lose their jobs, for example, in the fossil fuel industries, and ensure that those people can be retrained to work, for example, on installing solar panels. So that's a first line of work, really, looking at how we can rethink our economic models and paradigms. The second line of work is about trade, and mainly the World Trade Organization, or the WTO. There's a very exciting development in the WTO, and this is the installment of a new group of about 50 countries, which is called the Trade and Environmental Sustainability Structured Discussions. So this is a group of more than 50 countries who want to find ways to improve environmental sustainability through trade. What is unique in this group is that it wants to engage with civil society, because in the past, the WTO was very secretive and closed off to civil society. And we were very pleased that we were invited as part of a very small core group of stakeholders to participate in the first meeting of this new Trade and Environmental Sustainability Group in the WTO, which was last month. And this was really a unique meeting for the WTO. And it was the first time that civil society was invited to be present and to speak in a WTO meeting. So what we are doing now is that we are building a consortium with several other civil society actors in Geneva to support the work of this Trade and Environmental Sustainability Group in the WTO, and to really focus especially on the capacity of developing countries to engage meaningfully in these meetings. We will also seek radical outcomes from this group. So to ensure that the outcomes from this group are equitable, that they are just, and that they have environmental integrity. Some topics that we will focus on in the WTO are trade and climate change. For example, the abolition and elimination of fossil fuel subsidies, because it's really an aberration, right, that we live in 2021 and we are still subsidizing actually the production and the consumption of fossil fuel subsidies that are destroying our climate. Instead, those subsidies, they should be diverted towards supporting energy efficiency and renewable energy. What we also support and focus on in the WTO is the circular and regenerative economy and trade. and fostering the dissemination of environmental goods and services. So another topic that is currently rounding up in the WTO, and these negotiations are coming to an end hopefully this year in the WTO, is the elimination of harmful fisheries subsidies. So we are currently in the situation that about 90% of fish stocks are overfished or are even depleted, and still we are handing $30 billion of subsidies every year to a large-scale industrial fishing fleet. And this all comes at the cost, for example, of artisanal fishers and small-scale fisher folk. So these small-scale fisher folk, for example, who go out with small canoes in Western Africa, which I have seen with my own eyes, they go out at 6 in the morning in small canoes and they row into the ocean with small nets. Not much fish is left for them, because on the horizon you can see those huge trawlers from Europe that are taking all the fish out of the ocean. So in the WTO, there are negotiations going on indeed to eliminate those harmful subsidies. So I mentioned a lot of different topics. This program, I think, also covers a lot of important ground. And the field can be, of course, quite overwhelming when we talk about economic systems broadly at such an abstract level. But I think that for Quakers to be involved in this field of economic systems, first of all, it is very important to be well informed. And I think action in that sense, it starts with discernment and with deliberation and with study and reflection. So I'm looking forward to all your questions and ideas. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Joachim, we thank you so much, you and Jonathan. Every time I hear you speak, it brings it so close and makes it accessible. Sometimes for me, the economic system seems like just too huge to contemplate. But so let's see, we have some hands up already. Maria Huff from Banbury, UK.
Hello, thank you. That's a wonderful talk. I'm wondering, is it like QUNO and so on interact with nation states, but some of our multinationals are so big now that do we need a separate platform to interact with them?
Well, multinationals are representative. They lobby both individually with governments and with other stakeholders, but they're also getting together in platforms like the World Economic Forum. So the World Economic Forum happens to be also based in Geneva. And they're actually also one of the other stakeholders that are invited to those meetings on trade and environmental sustainability in the WTO. So another platform where multinationals can come together is the International Chamber of Commerce, which also has a representative in Geneva. Those separate platforms, they exist for multinationals, and we know the people who work in those platforms and represent them. For those platforms, I think their challenge is that they represent often a very big diversity of multinationals. So some multinationals, they might have low carbon technologies, environmentally friendly technologies available that they would like to market. So they would be more in favor of action on sustainability, whereas other multinationals, obviously oil companies, fossil fuel companies, they're pedaling back. So they're trying to slow down the move in those platforms toward equity and sustainability. So I think it is important for us to engage with those platforms and to strengthen the progressive voices there, so that the people who work, for example, for the Chamber of Commerce and for the World Economic Forum, that they feel encouraged to take the more progressive and radical side. So yes, the platforms exist and we engage with them, but in a critically constructive way, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's hear from Carolyn Heyman from London.
Hi there. It's lovely to be with you again, Jonathan and co. I was very excited by what Joachim said about this group at the WTO, because that's quite a significant number of countries. I wondered, what sort of countries are they? Is the UK one of them? And is it a group that you expect will grow over time?
Yes, thank you, Caroline. So I think the very positive thing about this group is that it's a very diverse group of countries. So you have the UK, you have Canada, you have Switzerland, Norway, quite wealthy countries, but then you also have Senegal, Costa Rica, and a group of developing countries that wants to join. So I think it's quite diverse, and that's very positive. And there's definitely a set of countries that also wants to join. So the WTO has 164 members. 53 of those are now in this group, and I'm sure this group will grow. Most recently, actually, the United States has shown interest in joining this group. So if the US joins, that would already be a critical mass. And it would also be obviously be interesting if China and or India could join. Yeah, so the group is growing. Yeah.
Let's hear from Stephen Mandal from Reading, UK.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I was interested that you talk of promoting the circular economy, and I'm wondering if there's any sign that people really understand what the circular economy is, and whether that ending of the growth of use of resources is being considered at all seriously in the WTO and in other international organizations.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. I think the circular economy needs to be understood at several levels, right? You have really the process level, so the company level, and there a lot of industries are looking for ways to make their business more circular. But they also run into challenges there. For example, a very simple challenge is if you have clothes, for example, your trousers, they're made up of different materials. So you might have the buttons that might be plastic or metal. You have cotton, you might have some polyester. So it's not that easy to separate all those materials and you reuse them. So there's very practical barriers to that. Then at the more systemic level, you need to have the policies in place and the requirements and the standards. So the European Union now has a strategy for circular economy. China has a very important strategy on circular economy. So it's very important to have there an interaction between the policy level and the practical level. And then your second question was about, sorry, could you repeat it, please?
Is there any sign that there's a recognition about what a truly circular economy, which would mean no growth in the use of resources, would mean, and what institutions could cope with that?
Right. Yeah. So what is very interesting here indeed is that trade is based on the idea of value chains and supply chains. And for circular economy, we also need to rethink our value chains and supply chains. So even in a circular economy, those different steps of production and recycling, they will happen in different parts of the world. So there's a big overlap here between the thinking that we have in trade and in supply chains and the kind of thinking we need to make our economy more circular. So I think definitely the WTO has an important role to play in this. So yes, trade and the WTO have an important role to play, but we should also look, of course, at the national and at the local level on how we can implement circular economy. And it's important to look at the linkages with other environmental areas, so as, for example, climate change, because if we would make our economy totally circular, we would cut our emissions of greenhouse gases by half. So there's a strong linkage between circular economy and climate change and climate action. Thank you.
Well, that gives us hope that we each have a role to play in creating circular economy. Yolka, would you like to ask your question, please?
Yes, Joachim. Hi, and everybody. I would like to know, what do you mean when you said we are expecting a golden age? What do you understand in a golden age? It seems to me that it could be understood completely the opposite of what we are talking about here. But of course, it could also be the golden spirituality and the golden heart and the golden mind. But could you please explain this a little more?
Yeah, sure. This is actually an economist in the UK, Perez, and she has laid out this idea that we have come at the end of an economic cycle, and we are entering a new golden age, not just of wealth or of prosperity, but really a broader idea of growth in human well-being. So greater equality, increase in well-being for people around the world, and reduction in poverty mainly. And this could be coupled with restoration of our environmental resources and of our ecosystems. So I think what we're looking at here is really a broader set of ideas that would belong to a golden age. So it's really it's beyond monetary golden age. It's also environmental and social golden age, and spiritual indeed. Yeah.
Good. Let me just say there's a question in the chat which encourages us not to use too many acronyms and to explain what we're talking about. So the WHO, right, the World Trade, WTO, World Trade Organization, QUNO being Quaker United Nations Office. So if they're, as we talk, let's do our best to not use too many acronyms. So let's hear the question from Patty Constantino from Mexico.
Yeah, hello, thank you. Yeah, I was wondering about the definition of developing countries or developed countries. And that I relate to the spiritual ideas, and also the psychological behavior that is behind demand and supply, how we consume. So I was wondering if there at QUNO, you are trying to address this, how really developed or in developing countries is not very well defined with the GDP or whatever. From my point of view, it's more related to health issues, to happiness, to satisfaction, as you were saying, to well-being, a state of well-being. And I was wondering if you are going to address this in your publications. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, it's indeed it's a bit of a term of art, right? Developing versus developed country, or industrialized versus non-industrialized, and it's not so easy to draw the line. Where's the difference? Where does it start and where does it end? This group of developed or developing countries, and what we also see growing is actually a group of middle-income countries. So they're not fully industrialized yet, and they're not developing anymore, like the least developed countries. And indeed, it's also important to look beyond, for example, income per capita, and look at things like health, life expectancy, happiness, satisfaction. And somehow there's a strong correlation between income per capita and health, happiness, and satisfaction, but there's also a limitation. So apparently above a certain level of income, people's health and satisfaction and health indeed doesn't really grow that much anymore. So there's a limit, let's say, not just to growth, but also to happiness based on material wealth. And what we see is that we welcome a whole variety of countries without looking whether they are developed or developing. even though we always try to get the greatest variety and diversity of countries and representatives in a room. So also, for example, looking more geographically at different parts of the world and looking at different positions that countries hold and not just their level of industrialization. Yeah.
Mhm.
Maybe Jonathan, you would also like to add to that?
Thank you. Just to say briefly that one of our roles in the different programs in QUNO is to try to give more access and information to those countries that are poorer. And let me explain that context. There are 25 different international organizations in Geneva. A less wealthy country might have 4 or 5 diplomats trying to cover all of those, whereas some large nations will have 50, 60, 100 people. So there's a built-in disadvantage there. In some areas where we specialize, we are able to provide information, orientation to newly arriving diplomats, and more generally in the work we do to make sure that the voice of those less wealthy countries is heard.
Good. And so, you know, that question began thinking about the indicators and what, so Joachim, I hear you implying that there may be many indicators we need, that there's so much more than GDP in a country's health.
Yes, indeed, GDP is a very imperfect indicator because it counts up all the economic activity in a country. So including things that we maybe don't want, like the arms industry, like a prison system if it's privatized. So those are things that are not really contributing to people's quality of life, right? And what we want to see is have a more granular view of the factors that play an important role in human flourishing and in human well-being, and also in environmental health. So if we have this broader, let's say, dashboard of indicators, then I think that will be more useful than this very imperfect indicator of GDP that has been adopted 100 years ago and that just doesn't work anymore. It's just too crude, and I don't think one indicator will replace GDP, because we really need this more detailed and granular view of those factors that play an important role in our lives.
Yeah, thank you. It's very, very helpful. Let's hear a question from Barry Lang. Tell us where you're calling from, Barry.
I'm calling from Costa Rica, and it was nice to hear that Costa Rica is listed as one of the countries in the new trade and environmentally sustainable group. I'm wondering, though, when you also listed those countries, is there any criteria for membership in that group? Are you signing on to any ideals or goals, or is the motivation for some countries, with the US has expressed interest to control things as opposed to sustain and support things?
That's a very important question indeed. And for that, I need to give a bit of a background on why this group was created, because there was already a committee on trade and environment in the World Trade Organization. But all the members of the World Trade Organization, they are a member of this Committee on Trade and Environment, including countries that are big fossil fuel producers. And they have been backpedaling and they have been blocking progress in this forum, this Committee on Trade and Environment. And exactly for that reason, a smaller group of WTO members came together and they started this new group on trade and environmental sustainability, which is much more focused, more progressive, and more ambitious. So I think the first requirement for countries to join this new group is that they should be truly environmentally ambitious. And I think it's well known which countries are ambitious in that sense. And further, there are no specific requirements. As I said, it's a great variety of countries that have joined this group now, and I think the outlook is very positive.
Thank you. And I think, Joachim, I don't know that you mentioned that the reason the World Trade Organization is changing is because it's under new leadership, right? A woman from Africa, I believe.
Yes, indeed. Dr. Ngozi, she is the first woman to lead the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and she is the first African. And she has an incredibly impressive CV. She did her studies at Harvard and MIT. She was for 25 years in the World Bank. And maybe more challengingly, she was the Minister of Finance in Nigeria twice, including a period when her own mother was even kidnapped because of corruption and things that were going on. But she's a real, she's a staunch supporter also of climate action. And she really wants to move things in the WTO. So it's we are very relieved that she became the new Director General leading the World Trade Organization. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Leadership does matter, I think. Joe Matthews from London. What? Okay, Joe, we're going to come back to you because we can't hear you at the moment, and we'll come back to you after Ed. Ed Dreby from Philly.
So one of the things that has been most appalling to me during the pandemic is that with all of the economic hardship that's going on in the United States, our stock markets are almost daily reaching new record levels, which is appalling. And you've spoken of the need to look at systems. And one of the systems that has concerned me is the way the whole financial system is functioning and the way in which the current monetary system feeds that. And I'm wondering whether that's here, it's an area that some of us have been trying to get our lobbying organization in DC, Friends Committee on National Legislation, to look at, and we haven't gotten very far with that yet. And I'm wondering whether it's even on your agenda.
Yes, the financial system is definitely on our agenda. Although one of the questions we have is what institutions in Geneva could do with this. So there's some linkage with between the WTO and financial services, but globally the main institutions are in Washington D.C. with the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. So we are in good contact with colleagues also who work with those institutions. And what you mentioned is very important. So what has happened with the prices of stocks, for example, even though we are seeing great economic hardship, we can see that the prices of all economic assets have been going up because governments have printed so much money and have driven down interest rates that the only interesting investments have become stocks, real estate, and things like Bitcoin. By the way, Bitcoin is now one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions because it's very energy intensive to mine Bitcoins. So yes, the people who have traditionally been benefiting from the financial system, especially during crisis, is the very richest. So we can see that over the past year with the pandemic, every day there was one new billionaire in the world. At the same time, a lot of people in the middle class have been benefiting from rising house prices, but those people who have been losing out, of course, are those without any financial or other assets. And that's of course the biggest group of people in the world don't hold stocks. So the financial system is a huge contributor to inequities, And it's definitely one of the topics that we're looking at, but in very specific instances. So for example, when we look at the purpose of the economy, when we look at inequality, then we will also look at what the contribution is of our financial system to those inequities. Thank you.
Thank you, Joachim. Joe Matthews, do you want to come in with a question?
Can you? You can hear, okay. My question is around universal basic income. I'm really mindful that the pandemic has really brought into sharp focus the need for income to be stabilized. And I'm mindful that before the pandemic, this topic was not mainstream. And looking at Kate Biquette and Richard Wilkinson's work on minimum levels of income needed for well-being, it strikes me that with many national governments currently subsidizing wages to greater or lesser extent, is there a possibility, and indeed is there an appetite in QUNO to seek or push for universal basic income, particularly as we approach COP26, as a foundational stepping stone towards the fair and just society, on the basis that stabilizing income disconnects consumption, or I should say attachment to the old economy, and starts to bring us into a position where people can start to attend to the environment because they're no longer primarily concerned with their source of income.
Yes, thank you, Joe. Very good question about universal basic income. And indeed, it's a very interesting idea in itself, universal basic income, especially now that we see that a lot of people are freelancing and have temporary contracts. And the social welfare systems that we have in place simply don't give sufficient protection to those people. What we also need is a simplification and an update of those social welfare systems. And there have been a number of trials and pilots with universal basic income. In general, they were quite positive, but not sufficiently positive that those countries, for example, in Finland, there has been a big project with the UBI, universal basic income, they were not sufficiently successful that they have rolled out universal basic income at the national level. So what is needed more is research and piloting of universal basic income, see where it can be useful. And I'm also involved actually more in a personal capacity in a pilot on universal basic income now in Geneva, where we are trying to see how UBI, universal basic income, how it could work at the local level. There have been referenda in Switzerland about universal basic income, and those proposals have been voted down in the past. So I think a better understanding is needed of where universal basic income can be useful and where not.
Thank you, Joachim. Very interesting question. We have two other hands up, and I think those will need to be our last two, I'm afraid. I think this could go on for quite a long time if we allowed it. Jorge Arus from Ecuador. Jorge?
Thank you, Joachim. Very informative, your presentation. I have a question concerning this conundrum, this dilemma of economic growth and bringing people across the globe out of poverty, and the impact of this effort on the environment. And in particularly, I would like to know what the QUNO's thought, or your agency's organization, your group's thoughts is about the role of these large economies China and India in this situation, and how do you see things developing? How do you see, what are you trying to do about that, about these challenges?
Indeed, economic growth is one of the things that we are looking at, and we will be looking at more in depth. I think it's too much simplification to say economic growth is bad, right? Because it's easy for people in very wealthy countries to say we had enough economic growth and now we should stop growing around the world, because some countries simply will need some economic growth to alleviate poverty. In addition, for example, to redistribution of the resources that are already available. So it's a combination of economic growth in developing countries and redistribution of the financial wealth that is already there in the world, and which is highly unevenly divided. So we have great extremes of wealth and poverty in the world, which is totally unnecessary. Because we have enough for everyone to have to live a good life. So one of the things, first of all, that we will do is to look for complements of GDP growth. So which other indicators are there for economic growth? And looking also at the quality of economic growth. So it's not just about the quantity of growth, but also how that growth is generated, how sustainable it is, and how much does it benefit the population broadly. And then also, of course, as you mentioned, looking at the environmental impacts of that economic growth. For example, economic growth in the past few years has been very much driven by debt. So in wealthy countries, we needed to borrow $3 to generate just $1 of growth, which is totally unsustainable. We cannot inflate the economy more than it naturally can grow. Otherwise, we will be stealing from future generations. So that's also what sustainability means, right? Giving enough to the current generation without impeding and damaging the opportunities of future generations. So I think we need to look at economic growth broadly. We need to look at the pros and cons, and especially look at quality of growth versus quantity. And you mentioned big countries. I think China currently is also very much becoming aware that its economic growth cannot last forever at the high level that they had for the past few decades. For 30 years, China had economic growth of, let's say, 9 or 10% a year. And now that economic growth is going down to 4 and soon 3% a year. And then I think China will have less and less of a focus just on economic growth because they cannot keep up the economic growth. So they have to satisfy the population with with progress in other areas.
I just want to say, wow, this has been so wonderful. Joachim, you have such a depth of knowledge and an ability to speak about it so easily and make it accessible for all of us. And to me, that is really a remarkable gift that you've given us here today. Meantime, I also just want to bring us back again to what you said, Joachim, about spiritual solutions, and that you know, people of faith bring that whole element of respect and discernment and detachment from economic gain, in a way, I guess I'll say. But I just wanted to add that I've been part of an interfaith group preparing for COP26, and we all give presentations, and people are from all over the world, economic systems. And so faith leaders have this very keenly, in mind. It's the way people are thinking all over the world. I find it very encouraging. And I think your framing of being on the downslope of the current economic system gives me hope that we have a new system to look forward to, that the golden age really could be, as Yalka said, the golden age of spirituality and of our well. And finally, I just want to say thank you all for being here, for asking such amazing questions, I want to thank Joachim and Jonathan, both of you, and see if either of you has sort of a final word that you'd like to say before we close. Joachim.
I would like to thank you, Gretchen, for your wonderful facilitation tonight. And I just picked up one very important word that you mentioned, and that is the word accessible. So I think it's very important that what is happening in terms of economics is accessible, because as they say, we vote with our wallets every day. That's true, but this is also really a bottom-up exercise. Economy is a human business, and we build it together every day. And connected to that is that you mentioned the importance of spirituality. And that also gets me to the purpose of what an economy could be. Is supporting really spiritual civilization. That's what we're trying to do, right? We try to grow towards an economy that supports a spiritual civilization and is in service of a spiritual civilization. So yes, with those 2 points, I would like to thank you very much. And thank you all very much for your attention. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Jonathan, do you have anything you'd like to say?
Yes, first, indeed, thank you to Gretchen and Faith and to all of you for your interest in making this possible. Second, I'm the director, so I always have to say these things. The information, more information about QUNO in the chat box. Do invite you to read and understand more about our programs and methods. And to add to what Joachim was saying just now, which is difficult to improve on, to say that among the diplomats and UN agency people we work with, there is certainly a personal hunger for more meaning and for making the world a better place. Something that we find very inspiring when we see it, and particularly, strange as it sounds, to get people together in a quiet space and to create an atmosphere where people can listen to each other and share off the record some of their deepest concerns and hopes really works. So I want to leave with you the idea that these things seem so huge, and I don't think we mentioned, but it's Joachim with some help from part-time of a program assistant doing these things. You've asked us to do several things. We won't be able to do them all just next month, but we do have hope because we see that there's a receptiveness among the people we work with, and that they want to have space to share their hopes and fears and dreams. So thank you all for your interest and for making it possible.
And we thank you all for, it's a great honor to connect friends around the world with what other friends are doing. I mean, I'm very fortunate, and Nancy Irving would appreciate this, to sit in the seat where I can see how all that sort of happens. And indeed, friends around the world are deeply concerned about the world and making it a better place. We all are, and we all can work together to continue to do that. And so with that, I say, God bless you all. Carry on, keep at it, keep praying, and thank you all for tonight. Thank you for this time together.
Thank you, Gretchen. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye from Ireland.
Thank you.